Indeed, you're watching Good Morning Kenya. This is Entertainment Thursday, and the segment on air right now is Future Voices, where we give the young people of this nation a chance to contribute to matters that affect the national discourse or shape the national discourse. And today we are focusing on leadership, democracy, and Pan-Africanism in contemporary politics. This is a perspective of the young people, just to view how they view leadership, matters to do with democracy, and by extension, Pan-Africanism. And for that conversation, on my far right, I'm joined by John Waroi, who is the Deputy Chair, PLO Lumumba Foundation, who is also a Pan-African. Welcome to Good Morning Kenya.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm very well.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
And thank you for making time. And also Kelvin Kahio, who is the chairman, Mount Kenya Youth Organization. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Mike.
Unaendeleaje?
Niko salama.
Yes.
Happy to be here.
Karibu sana. Leadership, democracy, Pan-Africanism. Let's go bit by bit. We'll deal with leadership, then we go to democracy, then we look at Pan-Africanism. But I want to get a perspective of you both. You look at leadership within the contemporary politics that we have, not only in Kenya, but also in the region, East Africa and Africa at large. From what you've seen and observed, what do you think is leadership within the context of African continent? Let me start with you.
Thank you very much. Leadership is about service. And there is every assumption in Africa that occupation of public office is leadership. That is not leadership. We have many individuals in this country who are misleaders. And their only claim to fame is that they acquire political power so that they can enrich themselves. They are not there to serve. So until the day that we understand leadership well, we are not going to realize our potential. So leadership is service, and being a politician does not qualify you to be a leader. Because when you look at this country, many individuals, they don't have the right qualities of leadership. Yes.
What would you say, and looking at the African context now in terms of leadership, how would you say leadership looks like? What is leadership in the African context?
I think, Mike, we have to understand leadership first. And leadership is different in each context. By that I mean, in East Africa, leadership is different from what leadership is in West Africa, or for example, is in Europe. Leadership comes from the people, and leadership is inspired by the cultures that our cultures as Africans, as East Africans. So I'd say leadership, like my brother said, it's not just about, it's not circled to political leadership. You could be a youth leader, you could be a political leader, you could also be a team leader or something like that. But what I would like to point out is that leadership is influenced by our cultures. So in the context, before, I know you're going to discuss about democracy, but I'd like to give you some brief background about leadership.
Yes.
Leadership in Kenya is different from leadership in the West, for example. By that I mean, what we consider as a leader is different from what others consider as a leader. In Kenya, for example, our culture informs us that a leader is someone who is elected first by the people, but is also supposed to fight for the people, supposed to listen to the people, supposed to ensure that the will of the people is supreme. So that's my idea of leadership.
The will of the people is supreme. And there's something that John, you said, that occupying a public office does not make you a leader. But then again, you look at how elections are done in Africa. What things, or what do you think people pay attention to when it comes to putting people into leadership positions, especially in Kenya and also the larger continent of Africa?
You know, the tragedy of this continent is that people respond to the stimuli of money. People respond to the stimuli of ethnicity. That is why in this country, however good your ideas may be, if you don't distribute money to people, the likelihood of you being elected is very minimal. I have a friend of mine who is contesting for MCA, and he wanted to contest for a position of an MP. But he tells me one of the greatest pain that you endure if you are an African politician is to convince the electorate that ideas count for something. And he was telling me that when you go to the electorate and you are waxing eloquent, telling them that when you elect me, I'm going to ensure that you have good health services, I'm going to ensure that you have good education, they are waiting for you to finish, and they tell you, we hear you. We know you are going to do all those beautiful things. But in the intervening period, I must eat. And so, no matter how good your ideas are, if you don't carry money on that day, your ideas, like the elephant before them, will never fly.
So in other words, money is leadership, in the way you're putting it, is attributed to material wealth?
Absolutely. I mean, in this country, if you look at the men and women who occupy public office, we had another one the other day saying that when 2 years ago he was worth 650 million. And 2 years later, through the pronouncements of abracadabra, he's worth 1 billion. It is Kenyan money that they are stealing. So that is why they are able to manipulate the people. And because the people are also desperate, because they don't have something to eat. You go across this country, people are hungry. And so when you give them that 200 shillings, they respond to that stimuli. And so they elect that individual because he has given them something.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is what happened.
You said that cultures also influences how Africans view leadership. Why is that? And how has that also affected the kind of politics that we do?
Okay, thank you, Mike. First of all, I want to speak as someone who is running for office. I'm running for MP Kangema constituency.
Yes.
I've been actively running my campaigns. And I'd say the leadership of today is very different from the leadership of the 1960s. In the 1960s, it was more about ideas. The likes of Kibaki, the likes of Tom Mboya, the likes of Jomo Kenyatta, they came into the political scene because of the ideas they had for Kenyans.
Yes.
So unfortunately, during the Moi period, if you were a broke person, if you did not have money, you are not viable for leadership. And this was during the lining up system, where a leader would stand and people would line up.
The
Mlolongo system, exactly. So I'd say that system, or rather that period, really transformed the leadership we have. Right now, as I speak, running for office in Kenya, it's such a very expensive affair. And I'm speaking from experience. When you're a young person, you're so excited about your ideas, the things you're going to speak to the people. But remember, even to bring up a gathering, you need some money to bring up a gathering. So I'd say, like, we have really dirtified the political scene currently. Because, for example, I was in Kangema yesterday, and I was having a conversation with a resident from Kangema.
Yes.
So he was telling me, from May, our houses will be smelling meat. Our houses will not be cooking greens. Will be just rice, beef, rice, goat, like that. Watakula nyama. Because that is the perception we've given to the common person at the ground. Because for them, it's give, I give. Give me something, I give you my vote. And remember, it's still a gamble because it's your money, depending on how much you give the constituents. For example, if I come, I give you 200 shillings, and my competitor comes and gives you 500 shillings, you are more likely to vote for my competitor. And that is what happened in Bere constituency in the last by-election. So I'd say we've dirtified the political scene, and it's an intentional thing because the politicians, they know they own the money, they control the capital.
Yes.
Going around the country. So they know if they make it an expensive affair, it's more safer for them than for young people like us with ideas. But I'd say ideas are still key because the power of the mouth is more important than the power of the pocket at times, depending on how you convince them. So I'd say our leadership is really at a really bad place. It's really dirtified at the moment. And if you don't have money, it's really difficult to be a leader.
This looks like, I would call it an acquired culture that has entered into a political system where if you do not have money, as he's putting it, it's hard for you to get elected. Question is, when you look at leadership, why is it so hard for people to coalesce around a vision rather than instant gratification?
You know, the whole idea of the politics of money and money bags came after the reintroduction of multipartyism. You remember in 1989, when after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union,
Yes.
the Westerners came and told us that you must have something called democracy. And this democracy is built upon political parties. And the truth is, in many of these African countries, mobilization of these political parties is on the basis of ethnicity. And so what happens, these people, they go to these institutions, they steal money, then they come and give the population money, and then now the people will vote for them. I mean, we no longer listen to ideas in this country, and it is in the continent of Africa. When you look at the elections which were held in Cameroon last year, people were given money. When you look at the elections which were held in Uganda early this year, they were buying votes through rice and maize and T-shirts. If you look at Tanzania, the same thing. So we lost the track. We have introduced the politics of money, which has continued to put this country and this continent at its lowest.
And that has watered down the quality of leadership that we have.
Exactly, because, you know, if you have ideas and you want to contest for elections and someone else has money, the likelihood of you with ideas being elected is very minimal. They will go for that person who gives them 200 shillings. So that is what has debilitated this leadership in this continent.
And looking at leadership from the way you see many African countries going through, we have this problem of entrenched rulers. We have countries with presidents who have ruled for decades, 40 plus years. And, you know, sometimes the elections of such countries are marred by election controversy. From that angle, how do you see that affecting the democratic aspect of leadership?
Okay, you know, my mentor and a friend of mine called Professor Lumumba once said that no matter how good you are, if you stay for too long, you spoil it. A good dancer must know when to leave the stage. When you look at, for example, President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, when he entered in power in the 1980s, during the first 10 years, he was the recipient of an award for having been at the heart of proper management of the country.
Yes.
And at that time, Zimbabwe was producing maize that would feed the entire southern region. And when he was leaving power, Zimbabwe is the only country in the world that does not have a currency but has a central bank. It is because of leadership. When you stay for too long, you spoil it. You spoil institute. Because you had in Uganda the other day, one of the campaign slogans of the Museveni's team was protecting the gains. Which gains? It is the gains that they have stolen over the years, and that is why they are desperate to remain in power so that they can protect those gains. Because they know if someone else comes, he might end up jailing them, and they don't want that. And that is why political office nowadays, by those who are a little older, is sought by hook or crook. And Uganda is not the only example. Look at Cameroon's President Biya, 91 years of age.
Yes.
How do you run an office when you are 91 years? And the funny thing is, he doesn't even live in his country. He lives in France. You saw when the campaigns were commencing in the Cameroons, they brought a statue of the president to campaign. How do you, and the people of Cameroon elected him. Of course, we know that he did not win the votes, he won the count, but that notwithstanding, he is in office right now at 91 years. What do you do at 91 years in a public office? You Leave. You know, there is a famous African saying that for the young goats to thrive, the old goats must die. But the old goats have refused to die.
Looking at it from that perspective, you know, it brings about a disconnect, which is generational in terms of leadership, because we have a young population that is looking to take up such positions. But then again, if these young leaders have to take up these positions, what must they do? And two, is it possible?
I think we have to understand first the meaning of democracy. Democracy is the will of the people, by the people, and for the people. Okay? So, democracy democracy began in Greece, but in an African context, we have to understand, is democracy working for us? Because democracy is more, I'm an ardent supporter of democracy. I have to point out that.
Yes.
But we have to understand, is democracy working for us? Or are we electing the most popular, the most moneyed, the person who knows how to speak, rather than a person who has the right qualities as a leader? So for me, I don't look at democracy as putting in someone and giving him a timeline, because when you look at the African history, it's more of, it's our time to eat. Let's fight for this position so that it can be our time to. That's why I say that leadership is influenced by our culture. Democracy came with the West, and I'm an ardent supporter of democracy. But we have to evaluate our democracy. Is it working for us? For democracy to thrive, our systems, and that involves the judiciary, the IBC, the parliament, the police. The systems have to be working fast. So if they're not working, there's no way that there's no position for us as young leaders to get in. So we have to fix our systems first. We have to fix these offices first, so that young people as us, we can, like me and my brother here, we can have a chance, an equal chance to get in these positions of leadership. Otherwise, when we have limitations in these systems or in these offices, then it will be difficult for us to get in, because we don't have the money. Probably we don't have the connections. Probably we are still young and trying to build our own support base. So democracy our systems has to work fast. So in the African context, my brother mentioned the likes of Mugabe, the likes of Yoweri. I think in those countries, democracy is not working because the systems first are not working. Because for Mugabe, or the Zimbabwean president, the electoral office, it safeguarded his victory all through, even when he lost. So I think we have to fix our offices first, so that democracy can work for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when he says he speaks of the institutions working, these institutions have to work from completely, or what you'd say, an utmost independent aspect. Is that possible?
It is possible, but it will take a little longer, because, for example, when you look at this country, we have institutionalized ethnicity. So that when you create, for example, the position of a prime minister, somebody sees himself in that office. So we have killed institutions. And look at when you talk about independence of the institutions, take, for example, the judiciary as it is today. It is at its weakest. And that is not to mean that they are not good individuals in the judiciary. But institutionally, the judiciary has become weak. And why has it become weak? Because, for example, when the Constitution was being made, one of the things that they recommended is that we have the appointment of judges, and they are taken through public interview. And then what has happened is that the politicians have ensured that even that appointment of judges is controlled by them. When you look at the composition of the judiciary today, for example, it is not proven that, but there are suggestions that it is not merit that rules the day. So when one is appointed by their political godfathers, then you must pander to their whims. So in that regard, you have weakened the institution. Look at IEBC. the IEBC on paper appears to be a very independent body, but the truth is it is not. It is influenced and worked by political leaders however they want. So it is possible to create strong institutions, but that also takes the discipline of the leaders. Because if the leaders if for example, the leadership of this country goes and gives a judge, let's say for example 20 million, and it is money he has not touched in the last 1 year, he'll take it, unless he has the moral courage to refuse to take that money. So we can strengthen these institutions, but as it is now, given the nature of politics that the nature of ethnic politics that we have in this country, it is going to be hard. Because when you look at, for example, the integrity commission, the commission that deals with EACC, what happens is that we elect non-thieves into public offices, and then we expect them to behave like angels. So when we elect these people, what are they going to do? They are going to appoint one of their own. You saw what happened, the report on Shah. A whole community dominating almost 60% of the appointments made by Shah. How are we going to strengthen that body if we are working in that direction?
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. Let's take a breather, and we shall continue with this conversation once we come back from this short break. Stay with us. Still staying with us, and if you're just joining us, this is Entertainment Thursday. The segment on air is Future Voices, and we are talking about leadership, democracy, and Pan-Africanism in contemporary politics. And right now, let's conclude on matters leadership, and there are two things I want us to talk about. One is you look at political coalitions. Especially a case in point, in Kenya, it's hard for a single political party to win an election. Has that weakened the dynamic efforts of having a robust opposition? And when you look at a democratic competition, has it also been affected?
You know, one of the reasons why it is hard for any individual to win elections as a single person is because we don't have political parties in Kenya. What we have are just ethnic clubs or personality cultism. And if you look, since 1997, if you go back to history, there is no political party that has contested elections as a single political party. It's formations, it's coalitions, it's Kenya Kwanza or One Code or NASA or something. And the reason why it is that way is because we have retracted to our ethnic cocoons, and we must mobilize. And if you look, for example, the election in 2017, we had the Kalenjin Kikuyu coalition and the Luya and the Kamba and the Luo coalition. So they were saying effectively that we have been led by the Kikuyu and the Kalenjins for the past 5 years. Now the government that is coming must consist of the Luo and the Luya and the Kamba. So it is our turn to eat. So the reason why these coalitions will never work is because, number one, they are ethnic based. If you look at many of the so-called political parties in Kenya, they are ethnic in nature. And these coalitions are ethnic coalitions, which are just designed to ensure that the people who head those coalitions attain power by any means necessary, and they retain power by any means necessary. That is why when we elect our members of parliament, the allegiance that they pay is not to the political party. It is to those individuals who I call ethnic kingpins or low voltage warlords. And what happens is that they must move in a direction that is prescribed to them by those warlords. And the funny thing is, or what annoys me is, you may have good ideas, but if this warlord of a low voltage kind comes and hoists your hand or comes and hoists another person's hand, the people will ululate and say, you are the chosen one. And they will not listen to their ideas. They'll just elect you. So that is what happened. That is what has made the competition of ideas impossible in this country.
And, you know, progressive leadership should gravitate more towards leading by example, promoting integrity, accountability also, among other things. But when you look at leadership today, what would you say is the importance of having ethical leadership, especially when you look at a space where we seek to deepen our democratic space?
I think ethical leadership is something that we've not experienced as a country since independence. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, our politics is so ethnicized that we cannot have ethical politics, because each election, people gather around one political leader of their own tribe, because it's more of wewe ni wa kabila gani, wewe ni wa kabila gani. So I think we have not yet experienced ethical leadership for the longest time. And it's my prayer that our generation as young people, we are going to give this country ethical leadership. Let me give you an example, Mike. We were talking about coalitions. In 2023, we understood the idea of coalitions. It's a good idea on paper, but in practicality, it's a very terrible idea, because once a particular side wins election, then the other particular side, which is a group of ethnical parties, they all get left out once one side wins the election. And we understood this, and we decided to come up with a formula for our young people to ensure that we have our voice, even if our ethical backgrounds are put aside. So we decided we created a formula where we could have a youth leader sitting in parliament, elected by the people, not nominated, but elected. But again, we talked about institutions. The same institutions we were talking about, they put blocks on our ways. Starting from the IBC, they put blocks on our ways. In fact, the only time they decided to reply to our requests was when we decided that we are going to protest, and we informed the police of our intent to protest. But talking about coalitions again, I think our politics is in a really, it's in the ICU. Let me say that.
How are the young people now that you're gravitating towards those leadership positions? We're talking about leadership.
Yeah.
How then do you change that as young people? Because this also translates to the perception that people have when it comes to leadership.
I think as young people, we should first have a clear ideology. This is what we this is what we want to do. This is the direction we want to take as a country. If we have a clear ideology, then we have to work on that ideology. So how do we clean the political space? First is informing the common voters, informing them, educating them, telling them that even if you vote for me because I'm a Kikuyu or because I'm a Kalenjin, if I get in that position, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to take care of your problems because we have the same ethnical background. We have to put that inside, we have to inform them, we have to keep on educating them, and first of all have a clear ideology. For me, I'd say we need to understand if the system, the Kenyan political system, or rather the electoral system that we use, is it working for us as Africans? Let me remind you, democracy came with the West, or Wazungus. They brought democracy to us. But before even democracy, we had our own ways of leadership, right? So we have to look for a system. That is why you see China is going to become the biggest, is projected to become the biggest economy in the next 5 to 10 years. China, you cannot say China is a socialist or a capitalist country because it's mixed, right? Because they worked for an ideology, or rather a system that works for them as a country. The same for United States. United States, what works for them is capitalism, but they bring that capitalism with liberalism. They blend what works for them. So as Kenya, we have to come back to the drawing board and understand, is this system really working for us as a country? Do we need to take a step back and analyze and look for something that looks Kenyan, something that can work for us. Only then will we have ethical leadership.
We take it from a retrospective kind of an approach. Now, looking at democracy, John, you know, when you talk about democracy, we are talking about civil liberties, you know, periodic elections, multi-party systems and the like. But looking at the quality and depth of democracy within Africa, how would you say we are doing?
In fact, I no longer use the word democracy much because in my view, I think it misrepresents what we need as Africans.
Yes.
I think the Westerners, particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, came and told us that democracy means that you must have many political parties. Democracy means that you must have elections after every 5 years. I think there is a sense in which we must define democracy for ourselves. And if I was to ask, for example, what is the Kiswahili word for democracy? Bila kutohoa. There is no such word because it is alien to our circumstances. When you look at the post-colonial African states, many of them are multi-ethnic. And therefore, there are certain factors you put into consideration that would not make sense in a mono-ethnic country such as Denmark, for example. Take a country like South Sudan, for example. It has 5 vice presidents. It doesn't make sense on the face of democracy. But in order to preserve the nation, that which does not make sense makes sense in that environment. So my view is that we must define what we need as Africans, and we must look at governance. I prefer to use the word governance rather than democracy, because in my view, governance represents our specificities as African countries. And so until the day that we relook at the governance or the systems that we inherited from, there is an African-American called John Hendricks Clark who said that when African countries regained their political independence, they inherited systems of government that were designed by their former colonizers. And he went on to say that none of those African countries will ever succeed on the basis of those inherited systems. Because when you look at a country like Singapore, for example, when in the 1960s Singapore broke out with Malaysia, an obituary was written about Singapore. It was said of Singapore that it would never rise. But Lee Kuan Yew and his dictatorship nature of a benevolent kind recognized that when you marshal the people and lead them into some direction, then they will realize their potential. So they came up with their own system which was accommodative to their realities. And my good friend mentioned about China. China is an interesting country. You can never understand what system of governance they use, but they have made their own system which responds to their realities as the Chinese people. And that is why in the last 40 years or so, China has managed to pull 842 million people out of poverty into a middle class. It is because they have defined what they need as a country or as a people. So until the day that we recognize that and define that which works for us, we are not going to realize our potential.
Is it true? How then do we define what works for us, given that now we are a multi-ethnic country and everyone's interests have to be looked at from that? How do we define that?
I think, and I really believe that if we come back to the drawing board, I talked about ideology.
Yes.
In leadership, ideology is supreme. You have to have ideology for you to be a leader.
Yeah.
So let me give you a brief example for me, what an ideal governance in Kenya would look like. Let's look at ourselves as Africans, right? We have different, we have like 47 tribes. So let's come to the drawing board. Our ideology should be, how do we accommodate the interests of, if not a majority, if not all, a majority of these 47 tribes? So we need to come up with a hybrid system, okay? So what is a hybrid system? A hybrid system means a system that has aspects of a system that mirrors your society. For instance, let's look at HELB or SHA, for example.
Yes.
SHA, it's locked to mostly people who are employed, because it's really difficult for a person, for a mama mboga or a boda boda at this boda boda stage, to get into his pocket and then remove and pay for around 16,000 a year for the same SHA, because for him it's more of a burden. Okay, for him, if he gets, or for him or for her, if he gets sick, he'll probably rush to a clinic outside. So we have to look at a system that works for our people. So how do we bring this? How do we set up an ideology for our people? Let's create a hospital. Let's create an alternative for the person who is at the bottom of the ladder. Let's create an alternative for the woman who cannot take his kids to university and school, because it's way expensive right now. Let me give you an example. I was talking to a woman like a week ago. I was in a market in our rural area. So this woman, she has 2 kids in high school and 1 is in the university. So how is she going to be able? And remember, she's not. Her husband passed away. So how is she going to take care of these 3 kids with the burden of school fees? So we have to look at a system. Let's create a system that is a hybrid system. Let's have an alternative for the person who cannot afford these kinds of services. Yeah.
John, you look at those issues of democracy, free and fair elections, enhancing civil liberties, rule of law. What would you say have been the biggest challenges, especially for Kenya, in ensuring that we achieve all that?
You know, when you talk about the rule of law in Kenya, we don't have the rule of law. What operates is the rule of man. And it is because there is a group of people in this country who believe that they have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom, and therefore they must dictate what happens in this country. Of course, we'll be taken through the processes which are prescribed in the Constitution, but they are not their consideration is not very much looked into. For example, when you talk about public participation as it is today, we are told, you hear a bill was passed and you hear there was public participation, and you ask 10 individuals and none of them ever heard of anything like that. So in other words, there is a sense in which the rule of law does not apply in this country. So that is my view on.
You are a Pan-African.
Yes.
And this question, let's look at Pan-African, and we'll start with you. When you look at Pan-Africanism, can it exist, can that unity of Pan-Africanism exist devoid of democratic values?
You know, first it is important to know the brief history of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, the classical Pan-Africanism as we know it, started in the early 1900s with individuals who lived in the United States of America, and they were looking on how to come back to the mother continent. And I can mention individuals we had such as Henry Sylvester Williams from Trinidad and Tobago, and a very famous figure in Pan-Africanism called W.E.B. Du Bois from Boston in Massachusetts. And then we came into another phase of Pan-Africanism in the 1960s, where we were asking to regain our independence. And there were leading figures in that regard. We had individuals such as the Osage for Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, individuals such as Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, Chief Obafemi Awolowo from Nigeria. And the main idea of that phase of Pan-Africanism was to look at how we can decolonize Africa. After that, we have had another phase of Pan-Africans who have been calling for African unity. And that is actually the definition of Pan-Africanism. It is the call for African unity amongst the people who are in Africa and those who are in the diaspora. And in the contemporary world, we have Pan-Africans such as Professor Lumumba, a very renowned Pan-African. We had another lady called Rikana Chihombo Rikwao. and Joshua Maponga, and among the young people, we have emerging figures of Pan-Africanism. We have, they are to be found in different fields. We have a very good gentleman from Tanzania who is the leading Kiswahili speakers, recognized as the leading Kiswahili speakers in the world, yes, from Tanzania, called Jeramu Nkumbi. And we also have others like Osman Ture, who, these are people who are keeping the spirit of Pan-Africanism alive and well. And so the current leaders that we have, many of them claim to be Pan-Africans. And when they go to the United Nations bodies and other world bodies, they deliver very nice speeches. But when you look at what they are doing, it is exactly opposite to what they are saying. In East African community, for example, we had said that by the year 2024, we would have a single currency in East Africa. It did not happen because there is no willingness among the political class. The East Africa ought to be a federation by the year 2010. It is now 16 years down the line. There is no such thing. Why? It is because the leaders who are present in these offices are not interested. And for example, when you talk about the Pan-African, the unity of East Africa, for example, as early as 1961, the founding father of the United Republic of Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, had said that I am prepared to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda will become independent as one country, so that we begin working from that. He could see the future with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet, but Kenyatta refused, Obote refused, and that is why the East African community is on tenterhooks as we speak. Okay. We have, you know, in East Africa, we have a market of about 300 million. Yes. But how do you have a market of 300? How are you going to sell your goods when you go to Tanzania and when you want to cross the border in Tanzania, there are barriers there? In other words, there is no free movement of goods and people, and that is why the region cannot grow. We, in Kenya, we boast that we are a $160 billion economy. But it is like, and then Tanzania and Uganda, meanwhile, has about 70 billion or thereabout. It is like two dwarfs debating which one is taller than the other. The truth is, they are still dwarfs. Okay. Yes.
Now, let's close with this. You look at democracy, leadership, and Pan-Africanism. And I'll start with you, Kelvin. Where is the nexus, and how then do we move forward to ensure the three aspects work for the betterment of countries within Africa?
Thank you, Mike. I'd say Pan-Africanism is it's a very good idea. And if you look at its history, the same Pan-Africanism and democracy, at times they clash. If you look at Kwame Nkrumah, he was an ardent supporter of Pan-Africanism, but democracy brought him down because while he was outside for a state function, the military back in Ghana, they overthrew him. And why did they overthrow him? Because the people were fed with propaganda. The people were fed with a lot of misinformation that Kwame was not working towards the same ideals they were fighting for before independence. So we have to find a way to balance Pan-Africanism and democracy. Let's look at we have to begin, first of all, we have to begin at the East African continent, okay, the East African countries, yes, because we have a high potential to merge these. It's an average of 10 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Somalia, DRC, and we have a higher potential of pushing for Pan-Africanism so that we can show the other African countries that it's achievable. How do we do this? In the last around 5 to 10 years, we've been pushing to politically integrate the East African community. What does this mean? We have a central government. But remember, Kenya, we have a stable democracy. But the same is not the case is not the same in other countries like Tanzania, Rwanda, and all these other countries. So we have to ensure that these countries, they fix their politics first. Because the idea of the East African community is the idea that each country each country that wants to be part of this organization or this federation has to first begin as a federation itself, so that we can merge all these countries and have one unitary political system. And this has a lot of advantages for the African people in general, not only East Africans, because remember, a combined population of these 10 countries is over 350 million people. That is market, that is labor, that is a lot of, just imagine the tourism in Kenya, the oil in Uganda, the minerals in DRC. We will have a superpower of a country. So if we show these other African countries that it actually is possible, it will be easier to merge the African content as a whole, and we'll get there.
Indeed. And that also points out to political goodwill. As we finish, leadership, Pan-Africanism, democracy, where do they coalesce and make African countries better than they are?
You know, when we talk about Pan-Africanism and we talk about it seeking for the unity of Africa, that is the beginning of all of it. Because you realize that if, for example, in Africa we have a population of not less than 1.4 billion people. That is a potential market. And what would happen is that if we were to unite, and this was came up as early as on the 6th day of March 1996, speaking in Accra, Ghana, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the independence of Ghana, delivered a speech titled, "We unite or we perish." So as long as we don't unite, we are not going to realize our potential. And the reason why unity is important, in Africa, for example, as I've said, we have a population of about 1.4 billion people, with a GDP of about $2.7 trillion. And China, China has a population of the same 1.4 billion, and they have a GDP of more than 20 trillion United States dollars. So you can see the power of unity. Because if we were to unite, right now I can travel from here to Namibia without being asked about yellow fever certificate, without being asked all that, if we were to unite. But as long as we remain in these little units that we are not going to realize our potential. So if we unite, then we have one leadership. And this was thought about as early as 1963, when Kwame Nkrumah delivered his first speech at the Organization of African Union Unity Summit. He said that if Africa is to grow, we must come out of this hole with a single currency, with one central bank, with one government, with a common foreign policy, so that we begin working towards an African unity. And the thing that is going to ensure that this thing happens is good political will. As long as there is no political will, then we are just going to remain in the state that we are.
Indeed. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming here and talking about matters of leadership, Pan-Africanism, and also democracy from your perspective. Very interesting perspectives, actually. And we thank you for making time. That is John Waroye, who is a Deputy Chair, PLO Lumumba Foundation, and also a Pan-African, and Kelvin Kahio, who is the chairman, Mount Kenya Youth Organization, joining us here on Good Morning Kenya. That is the Future Voices, to talk about this matter. Thank you for tuning in. This is where this conversation ends. My name is Mike Migwe.